Welcome to the Seeds of Wisdom series, brought to you by From a Loving Place with author Rachel Wolf. If you like deep, meaningful conversations, this is your place. So settle in and enjoy today's guest. Disclaimer: the Seeds of Wisdom digs into some deep subject matter. In order to plant a seed, we have to dig in the dirt. That's how we grow. If any of the subject matter feels like too much, it is important to seek your own mental health support. I did, and it's why I'm able to be here doing this today. Hello and welcome to episode 27. Today's seed is Awakening Resilience During Turbulent Times with my very special guest, Joe Bailey. I was blessed enough to meet Joe while we were both on a panel for our publisher at Mango Publishing, and we had such a great conversation back then. I knew I wanted to get him back on this podcast with me to have another talk. And he graciously gave me his book to read, his newest book, Thriving in the Eye of the Hurricane. And I will tell you, I had some profound experiences reading it because I'm a huge reader. I read over probably 20 books a year. So I love reading, and I have studied spiritual, self-help, new age, and then the academic sides of psychology. So taking all that in and then reading this book helped to really simplify it all and all come into this understanding of, oh, it's so much more simple than so many of these other things make it. And it really made me think about my whole experience and the way of questioning my thinking. It just awakened something inside me to just go, oh, okay, it's a little bit of shift I need to do. So I can't wait to get into this conversation because I'm so excited for it. Let's start by, Joe, introduce yourself and tell us all about what you do.
Well, I really appreciate your comments about how this understanding simplified what looks so complicated. Because I was in the same boat in my 20s. I was trained as a clinical psychologist and worked in community mental health and the addictions field. Um, and I was very involved in all the latest developments in family systems theory and family therapy. I got to train with some of the best therapists in the world, Milton Erickson, Virginia Satir, people like that. So I felt like I was really prepared to work in the field of counseling. But I found as a therapist, I was getting burned out. And so I did yoga and I went on retreats and I meditated and I jogged every morning and I kept a journal. And it was like a full-time job trying to just keep my balance and my bearings because I didn't have that seed, that deep understanding of really the fundamental principles of how we innocently and automatically create the human experience from the power of our mind, which is a universal energy or spiritual intelligence that we're all connected to, like all of life, the power to think and create our perceptions by our personal thinking. However, whatever thought comes into our mind creates a perception, whether we're having a nightmare or we're actually in an experience, but we're thinking about something else. Whatever we're thinking is what we're going to perceive and what we're going to feel. And so and by being aware of that, it helps us kind of go into a state of meditation on the run in rush hour traffic, wherever we are. We don't have to wait to go get quiet and get our gears back. By understanding and having that insight in the moment, it allowed me to really remove like 98% of my stress in my life. And it just seemed too simple to me because I'd had all this, a wall full of books I'd read too, and all these trainings I'd had, but this was so simple. It just it went against logic to me at first. And it was threatening because I had invested so much time in studying all this. but it changed my life. And as it changed my life, my patients that I was working with, and I worked with some very difficult types of people with incest, people with physical and sexual abuse and that type of thing, and addictions. And the results were, they seemed like I wasn't doing anything, but my clients are getting better. And it's really confounded me, but it led me to kind of let go of everything that I'd been trained in and learned as a psychologist and start from a whole new paradigm, which to me is a true scientific paradigm. Psychology's first principle-based paradigm.
It I have to say, so when I was reading this and really getting, because it's a lot of the things I study, the different parts of it, but there was still a seeking to it all. You have to do this to get here.
Right. Yeah.
And so it made
And
it
keep doing it
complicated.
once you get there.
Yeah. And then when you would get do all those steps and you wouldn't have the result that they so-called promised you to have, then it was
Yeah.
something you did wrong. And so I was just like, wow, just that. And a big part of what has helped me has been the questioning of my thinking, understanding that my thinking is just a perspective. That's all it is. And it's my perspective. My perspective's creating my reality. That once I got that concept, it had really helped me, but there was this still that seeking. And what I realized with this is it takes out the seeking, because
Mhm.
it just allows it to be and says you don't have to do anything. And I was like, wait, what? I love that. Um, so talk about that more, because I know a lot of the examples in the book are I mean, there's people who have helped to fix neighborhoods, schools. I mean, from the projects to troubled high schools and everything in there. And it, what I love is that it is so simple that a student can do it. It
Yeah.
even a hormonal student, know. And I think I would just love to hear more about that part of the resilience, that inner resilience,
Yeah.
and how that it isn't about the doing.
If you look at young children,
Mhm.
if they're not traumatized, or they're just young children, like in their third and fourth year of life, you see a perfect example of innate mental health or resilience. They're just, they get upset and cry or get angry, but the next minute they're playing with their toy, or it's over. They're so in the moment. They're so present because they haven't yet taught to analyze, judge themselves, overthink, try to figure everything out. So they're not caught up in this quagmire of a very complex thought system. But with an understanding of the principles that I talk about in Thriving in the Eye of the Hurricane, and I wrote it because I saw how so many people that in my family and people I'd run into were really suffering. But the people who had an understanding of these principles that are in this book, it was, sure, they were affected. It changed their life. We went to Zoom instead of being in the office, and all these things changed, but they were amazingly resilient in the face of all this. And so I thought the world really needs a shift in their understanding of how the mind works. So, because we're in for some really turbulent times, we're just getting started here with the division, not only in our country, but all over the world, the rise of totalitarianism, um, the global climate crisis that is just devastating. Every day in the news, it's another major snowstorm or flood or tornado or hurricane, to be more specific to Floridians. Um, and so we're in for a real roller coaster ride here. And if we don't have our bearings, everything we do in reaction to it from the ego will make the problem worse. But when we respond from this wisdom that we're designed to have in every child, you see, how do they learn so quickly and rapidly in the first few years of life? A language, how to walk, how to interact with other people, how to read what mommy's feeling. All of these things they learn very quickly. But um, so wisdom, this innate intelligence, is never damaged, never destroyed. It's right under the surface. And often in a crisis, it'll come to the surface. Like when people are, in a car accident, they do things they never would have done typically. They save a person's life. They're very generous after a flood and they volunteer, or they go, wow, this, I feel so alive. This feels so good. But the crisis or the tragedy sometimes shocks us out of our habitual thinking, our ego thinking, into this innate resilience that's already there. So my job as a psychotherapist and as a consultant to industry and medicine and lots of different fields, my job got so easy because all I had to teach people is how their mind worked. And then they would see how to fix the problems in their business, their job in the military, as a police officer, as a firefighter, as a CEO of a big corporation. So it doesn't matter whether you're teaching this in high schools or grade schools or to parents or to CEOs or to political activists. I mean, I've worked with every kind of group you can imagine, and it just helps them become wiser uh, and more positive naturally, more hopeful, more able to think creatively in a crisis, so that the instead of it um, being damaging when we have a challenge in life, it actually deepens our resolve to listen inside and to access this infinite source of insight, creativity, and wisdom to make the world an incredibly wonderful place. And this book is a series of stories because I've been witnessing. I was one of the first pioneers in this psychology 40 some years ago, but now there are hundreds of thousands of people all over the planet. It's in every country in the world. It's We've got, when we do our podcast, they're in Russian, they're in French, they're in Spanish, they're in all the languages, because it's just kind of gone off because it works. It's simple, it works, it's cost effective, and the good news is everybody already has it. They just don't know it. One of my best friends, a coworker, she just wrote this book that came out a couple of weeks ago. It's that simple.
I like it. Yes.
It is. It's that simple. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Well,
But
one of the things I do love that, and you make the point of it, it doesn't mean we're not gonna have those habitual thoughts. It doesn't mean that
oh,
they're not gonna come up. And so, can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I know that sometimes people will look from the outside and go, "Oh, so it's a one-time fix all,"
well,
and
you'll be happy for
nothing
the first
ever is.
time. No, no, resilience isn't about being happy all the time.
Yeah.
Uh, sometimes I would say I'm much more happy more of the time than I ever was. And people that learn this, I would say that's true. But also when you're going through challenges, when you have a death of a loved one, for example, or you just lost your job, you still have all the same emotions, but you're not attached to your emotions. So I tell people, just don't try to control your thinking. Good luck on that. Just observe your thinking. Be aware that you're having a thought experience about what's happening. And that will allow that thought to pass through, not judging it, not trying to control it, just being aware I'm having a thought experience that's creating this feeling in me. And it's innocent, that I'm just being a human being. I'm sad right now, or I'm angry right now, or I'm stressed right now, or I'm worried. But being aware that coming from the inside out rather than the outside in is a game changer, because you'll still have your ups and downs, but you won't get stuck in a rut. Which is what depression or anxiety disorders are, or any mental illness, is just stuck in your thinking, going around and around expecting a different result. But when you are aware of your thinking, being connected to your feeling in the moment, it breaks the hypnotic trance of thought. It's called suspended disbelief. You see, like you're in a movie, this happens. You watch, let's say you're in a horror movie, or you're or a thriller or something. You're on the edge of your seat and your heart's pumping and your breath has changed and your muscles are all tense. And then someone next to you trips and knocks their soda over on your foot, and the whole all your attention goes there instead of to the movie, and all your body changes completely. Or you get a text on your phone, your first grandchild was born, and it breaks the hypnotic trance of the movie. So we're little movie makers inside, unconsciously, and we're creating our own unique movie of life, our separate reality, which I have a whole chapter on in the book. We all live in a separate reality of our own thought, based on culture, conditioning, habits, the past, and all of that. But underneath that, peel that layer of thought back, and underneath, we're all the same. We're all wise, we're all creative, and we're all resilient. And when we break the hypnotic trance of thought in the moment, when we're having a stressful moment, or we're having a feeling hopeless about the future of where we're going here, and we catch ourselves in the act of creating that without judgment, without anything but neutral, it just dies away. And what's left is this pearl of wisdom, this pearl of um, intuition, creativity, all the things we do all those techniques for. It's already in here. And all those techniques, as I look at it now, all those techniques I did in my 20s, they were like placebo effects, because if I did it, I would feel better. Or if I even thought about doing it, I'd feel better. And if I didn't do it as long as I should have, I would feel worse. So it didn't matter what I was doing, whether it was going for a run or meditating or doing yoga or saying affirmations or whatever. It was how I thought about that that gave me the experience. And that's a profound paradigm shift for humanity, to see that we cannot destroy our resilience, our human spirit, but we can cover it up innocently with our thinking. And everyone does, me included. Even though I've written 7 books about this now, I can still get caught up in my thought. And I just did a podcast about, having to demolish our home because of mold, and getting COVID, and having severe illness this last year, and how the principles helped me to stay buoyant even in the face of this incredible hurricane that I've had this year. And so I've really put this sucker to the test after writing this book. So, so it's but it's been in every religion. It's been, if you look at the root of every religion and every great thing that helped people come out in its innocent initial inception before it turned into a thing, it was raw inspiration. And that's what we're trying to point people to in this book, is how you already have it, you can't destroy it. And if you just understand how this thing works, get an understanding of the mind, it will allow that to surface more of the time. Not all of the time, but more and more of the time. Because as you you get a cumulative effect with insight that's called transformational evolution. You transform into your deeper self more and more and more over time if you have an understanding. Without that understanding, it's a downward spiral that can often lead to addiction, divorce, suicide, at its most extreme. So there are stories in here. I've worked with the Mayo Clinic systems, training their physicians in this, lowered the burnout dramatically. We've worked with police departments. We've worked with school systems all over the world, the military, um, the UN, you name it. We've been there. It's on the West Bank and Israel, and it's it's just because it works. It's just spread so rapidly around the planet. It's
Wow.
I'm just so lucky. Feel like I won the lottery of mental health.
Well, I am very grateful for even getting to read this book because really it did simplify things that were starting to I was feeling that itch inside that something doesn't quite feel right about this or some of the, you know what I mean, of that chasing, of that seeking, of that constant I'm not doing enough to be where I want to be type feeling. And this was just like put it into such a simple perspective of why that makes sense.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, because
so
as long as you're searching, you're dissatisfied.
yes, yes, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So with that, and if anybody wants to listen more because you know it's going to get good now, we start talking about this. Go to the YouTube channel at YouTube at From a Loving Place and see the full episode. There will be a link in the Facebook comments if you're watching this on Facebook, and it's also in the podcast. It will be a link in there to go to the YouTube. So thank you for anybody who's been listening so far. And now we are going to go beyond the seed and really get into this because that part right there is what I saw such a dramatic shift in.
Hmm.
And I had been, yeah, for me, I'll come to a thought and I'll realize that something feels off. And then all these people start showing up in my life to go, okay, here's your answer. It's like the wisdom starts appearing. And this was one of those things because I had read so many books and it was all about the doing. It was all about if you want to be here, you have to do this. And it just felt like too much. And then like you were saying with the meditate or with all the stuff, if you didn't do it the exact right way, you'd have that it's about that disappointment you feel
Yeah.
and it changes the thoughts. So I had gotten to a point before reading this book of, you know what, I'm going to do things that feel good. And if I feel pulled to do them, I'm going to do them. But if I don't, I'm not going to beat myself up about it. And that created a shift in me. But then to see this all on paper, I'm like, that's why, because my mental state changed naturally because I went to that resilience of
Mhm.
that burnout from seeking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, oh, so let's get more into that because I'm sure, working with a lot of the people you were saying that you work with, there has to, they're probably coming in with a lot of burnout from whatever they're experiencing.
So, can I talk now?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. So like I do a lot of work with people who are alcoholics or opioid addicts, and I train treatment center staffs in this understanding because it's had a huge impact on relapse rates for addiction, transfer of addiction from one addiction to another addiction. I got the alcoholism, like, but now I'm on pot, or I'm off pot, but now I'm on food, and then I'm off food, but now I'm on exercising, being an exercise addict. And so it's just transferring from one pattern of coping mechanism to another coping mechanism. So this isn't a judgment against all of those things, by the way. It's a great thing to exercise. It's a great thing to meditate. It's a great thing to just take time to be quiet, to connect with a supportive friend. These are all things, when done from insight or inspiration in the moment, it guides you to do those things. But you don't have to wait to get home to meditate. Like when I worked with the chairman, the department chairs at Mayo Clinic, they said, because they've been through every course you can imagine for stress prevention. They've done them all. And they said, this is so great. I can be in the middle of a meeting where I'm just so upset with my coworker, or this is not going anywhere. But the moment I realize where that upset's coming from, it's not from the meeting, it's not from them, it's from how I'm perceiving this, which is how I'm thinking this. And just that little bit of getting your foot in the door is enough to shift your consciousness. So you calm down in the middle of the difficult meeting, and you're able to listen better and see where we're stuck. And so you become that wise person in the room and say, have you ever thought about this, or you say something pops out of your mouth that is an insight that kind of impacts the group. And that's leadership. That's what leaders are supposed to do. But when it's done from insight rather than a technique, it's got truth behind it, the power of truth, because truth is wisdom. But you can't put it in a capsule. You can't package it. It's in the moment, your wisdom tailor makes an insight, a word to say, a gesture, a hug, a breakthrough thought that will clear the mood in the room, or your mood, like that. And it looks so simple. Like the CEO, I worked as the coach to the CEO at Mayo, and he he was just, the way he'd show up in crisis, because there was always a crisis in a department or over different things. He would just listen very deeply to people, and he would take it all in, and then he would say something that would kind of answer all the issues that were brought up. And staff would look and go, wow, why didn't I think of that? That's so obvious. We should have all thought, well, how come we couldn't see it? Because we were swimming around in fear and insecurity and frustration down in the gutter. We didn't have that higher state of consciousness that you get in meditation or other things, but you can get it. It's a portable form of meditation. You can get it in rush hour traffic. You can get it in the middle of an argument with your child. You can get it there's a story in my book about an autistic. Can I just read one of my stories?
Absolutely. I was actually going to ask you about this particular story to talk about it. So yes.
Let me just find it real quickly here. I've got all these little tags in my. Oh, you remember where it is?
I know it's towards the end. It was like 100 and maybe around 70, 80, somewhere around there. But while you're looking for that, I just want to say,
oh, you go ahead. Yeah.
Because of why I wanted you to share about this story that you brought up is because for parents, and I'm a parent of 2 teens, and so I deal with a lot of struggles. And this is why I wanted to have you bring up this, because it's huge for parents.
This is an extreme story.
Yes.
This is a story of a mom who's raising an extremely autistic child. The title of this part is "A Parent of a Child with Autism Moves from Living in Hell on Earth to Finding Heaven on Earth." Prior to gaining an understanding of the principles, Mary's life was a struggle every day. When she discovered the three principles, her life was transformed. Mary's understanding of the true source of her feelings freed her from the prison of her own thinking and gave her an equanimity that was only fleeting prior to this realization. Mary shares this transformational story. Life before the principles had moments of joy, but my existence mostly felt horrible. My son Adam, who is now 20, was born with autism. I had to live for two people, taking care of myself plus tending to his feeding, along with his outbursts and frequent waking up at night. My life was overwhelming, and there was literally no time for me. I felt conflicted, trapped in this difficult reality, while really loving my son at the same time. When you live in a home, an autism household, the simplest things can be a massive task. Adam could become very distressed if things weren't done a certain way. Food had to be served just so. Dressing him was a set ritual, and so forth. These were the bleakest of times. Death sometimes seemed like the better option to me rather than having to face yet another day. Regular families don't have to go through this. Most parents don't have adult kids who throw food against the walls. They don't suffer through these sleepless nights, fearing their kid will wake up and start screaming. It was like having a newborn, but the exhaustion lasting for years on end with no break. I felt victimized, waiting for the next trauma, the next stressful incident. Then I was introduced to the three principles through a retreat offered to parents of autistic children. Even though I had already made many positive changes in my life, I still felt burdened. Um, my constant thinking that Adam's autism was to blame for my unhappiness suddenly changed. Though nothing was different with Adam and his autism, everything had somehow changed. I had been to many other autistic retreats and temporarily felt better, but after the three principles retreat, the relief didn't go away. It's been 2 years, and I have to say I'm living in a state of grace. Nothing has changed in my circumstances, but something shifted in me during that retreat. So I won't read the whole story, but that's the
Yeah.
essence.
I had multiple parts of that highlighted because, like I said, as a parent, I know those times, because I do have we have some traumatic history in my family. So I I just related in such a profound way of how that thinking can completely freeze you and overwhelm
Yeah.
and yeah.
When you realize that you're always living in the feeling of your thinking moment by moment, when that's a huge insight, when you realize that you can't feel something without having a thought, conscious or unconscious, create it. Because the brain controls the central nervous system, and thought is the message that goes through the the channels of your neurological system that changes your organs and your endocrine balance and everything that we call our emotions is all coming from motion of the impulses from the brain. And what creates the impulses is thought. Thought is the power behind all life. And when you wake up like from a nightmare and you realize, oh God, it was just a nightmare. Thank God. My son didn't really die, or, I didn't really get in a car accident, or this didn't really happen. It was just my imagination. Even though things are really happening, there's, if you have 10 people witnessing the same event, you won't have one response the same for all 10 people. You'll have 10 different reactions to that same event because everyone is thinking and perceiving it from their unique reality of their thoughts in that moment. And the same person in a high mood has a different kind of thinking than they have in a low mood. So the same mom, you as a mom, can be going through the same thing with your teenager. One day you're like, oh, this is just a teenager, and you just slough it off. It'll pass. Another day, it's like, how did I do this? How do I get rid? When is the kid going to go to college? This must have been switched at the nursery in the hospital. This can't be my child. You have a completely different emotional response and perception because your thoughts change. So it's so simple that it could be that simple. But if you try to make it any more complicated than that, you end up feeling exhausted from trying to figure it out. That's why psychotherapies, by and large, have not had long lasting results. High level of recidivism in the addiction treatment world. Why is that? Because we haven't given people the operator's manual for the human mind so that they can be self reliant to access this innate positive feeling of mental health, of resilience, of well being. It is your nature as a human being to feel that connection to something bigger than yourself, to feel connected to other people, to be genuinely compassionate for people who are suffering. Little kids, again, if you look at young children and someone falls down and is crying, the other child will naturally give them a hug or it's okay, Johnny, but they don't have to be taught that, but they watch their parents and they learn how to react to things. And that becomes part of the conditioned habitual thought system that we call the personality, which stems from the Greek word persona, which is mask. That's not really the person, it's just a mask of the person, their habits of thinking. It's just all habits of thinking. It simplifies the treatment across the spectrum of the DSM-5. We've worked with people with schizophrenia and psychosis, the same results. It doesn't matter the severity.
I was going to ask about that because, there's like things like the narcissistic personality or disorder and like a sociopathic personality.
Mhm.
It by training them, you can still do the same process, or are
Um,
they less open to receiving it?
well, people have to be um, on board in one sense, and it's often people will like sociopaths will often up in prison or um, arrested. So it's often in those circumstances with someone like with a narcissism or psychopath, they have a life crisis. But if they're taught this understanding, let's say in the prison or on probation by the probation officer or by the therapist they've been assigned, because they're kind of at a state of crisis, they're sometimes more open because they don't like being in jail. Or they don't like the fact they have to report to the parole officer. Or they don't like it that they just got their fourth DWI. So they may, in those circumstances, have a moment where there's an openness. And if the person who's there as their healing agent can pass a little of this on, first by their own example, because they don't judge them, they're compassionate, they're understanding, they build a trust and a rapport in a very natural way. And it's during that time you can plant seeds of understanding through your own example, but also through stories. Your own creativity will allow you to see how to intervene with different populations, different personalities, different types of circumstances. That's why this isn't just gone out in psychotherapy. There are curriculums all over the world from kindergarten through college based on teaching these principles to children. It's being used in Ukraine now, working with the prisoners of war, the people who've been incredibly traumatized by the war in Ukraine. We're teaching the principles in mass to the camps now, and it's just amazing. because boy, they're suffering horribly. And to learn this, the the stories are just make you cry. You know, they went through so much trauma, rape, seeing their parents murdered, you know, on and on and on in a war situation like that. To see these people happy and resilient and having the endure the resilience to keep going in a war zone, that's powerful.
Those types of stories have always inspired me, even from Viktor Frankl and Elie Wiesel, and
Yeah,
their Holocaust stories, is because it, even though their stories tells it differently, it's still the same thing. It's still them taking the experience and shifting it in their mind.
yeah. One of the
And
stories in the book, do I have time to
yeah.
tell that?
Mhm.
Was of a guy I met, his psychiatrist, who came across the principles. And he had been in World War II, and his job was to go into Auschwitz after the war was over and help reunite the survivors with their people from their villages and that type of thing. And there was a man in Auschwitz that when he came in there, everybody was emaciated. You know, they were skinny and, you know, just skin and bones and gaunt and depressed and, you know, just had been through horrible trauma. And there was one guy in there that he called Wild Bill because he had a handlebar mustache and he had a big grin on his face and his cheeks were rosy and he was skinny, but he was joyful. And he came to him and he said, Bill, what, or whatever his name was, did you just get here? He says, oh no, I've been here for 5 years. Nobody survives Auschwitz for 5 years. He says, how did you do it? And he said, when I was a young boy in my town, or young man, the Nazis came and they lined us all up and they saved me because I knew 5 languages. I could be useful to them in the camps. But every other person I'd ever known, everyone in my family, everyone in my community, they shot down with a machine gun. They were all dead. And I had so much hate in my heart. I wanted to kill every Nazi. But then I had this insight that I was just like them. I hated them as much as they hated me. And it transformed me. And I realized from that day forward, I would only live in a feeling of love. Now, that's kind of a miracle, right? But that struck that young soldier. It just got in his head. How could that guy have that change? And so he became a psychiatrist. In his whole career, he said he was looking for something in psychiatry or psychology that would explain how that person could be resilient. And then I listened to Sydney Banks, my teacher, speak on a video or something. And so he came down to do an internship in Florida where I was doing my internship and studying this as a psychologist because he knew that Sid Banks knew what that guy knew, but it was now coming into the field as a psychology, of psychotherapy, of prevention methodology. And it was just that encounter with, and he was the guy who he actually ended up starting the all the research on near-death experiences and interviewed people because they had the same experience when they died of this enlightenment or this awakening, this extreme peace. And so he saw that even in the moment of death, people can have this resilience. And if they didn't, if they got brought back, it changed their life from that point forward. So there was
It's,
no scientific understanding of, well, how did that happen? It was just like a miracle. So this explains how that miracle happens.
and I think that's part of why I loved it so much, is it, even because I am so drawn in by these kind of stories. I'm so drawn in, even when reading about like Jesus or Buddha or Martin Luther King Jr., it's that it was that they still went to love in the face of adversity. They still went to love in, and why that Holocaust story actually hit me too. It's like And it's the whole premise of what I do is from a loving place is how do I project out love? Even in the face of the ugliness, even in the face of all of this, how do I keep projecting out love? And by focusing on it, it helps my brain stay in that thinking mind.
Mm.
And so for me, that is a big part of why I do what I do.
So that's
It's,
resilience. Yeah,
yeah.
you're a very resilient person, Rachel, and you've been on the search for this,
Mhm.
like me. We went into the fields that we went into. For me, I had an anxiety disorder. I always was fearful, and I couldn't speak in public. And now I speak in public every day. I didn't
Yeah.
think I could write. I didn't think I'd go to college. I had all this self-doubt and insecurity. So we we seek what we don't know, and that trying to survive, trying to feel better is leads to curiosity, leads to an open mind, leads to insight. So it's just beautiful how the mind works when uh, probably the most powerful feeling there is hope. Because hope, when you feel a feeling of hope, it frees your mind from rigidity and you begin to be open to new thinking. And that's when insight pops in the mind.
It's so true. And, because I was diagnosed with PTSD at 16. And I remember
Wow.
and at the time, trauma therapies were not good. And
Oh,
I was told that I would always feel this way. I would always feel, and I just remember going, I can't live believing that it will always feel this way. And to the point at 17, I tried to commit suicide because I couldn't live with that
yeah.
I will always feel this way. I will always feel victimized. I will always have these reactions. I will,
Mhm.
and so that questioning of just that advice
Mhm.
helped me at least to the point of seeking, no, that cannot be right. Because to me, it was just like going back to those stories of Martin Luther King, of Jesus, of Buddha, of anybody, of all these different, of the Holocaust survivors. How can that be right if they did these things?
Yeah.
you
That,
know so I knew there was just something off by it, and it
that
is
was your
what helped drive me.
that's your wisdom.
Yeah.
And
And
you
that's
and
what you just made me realize. That was what, yeah, it
yeah.
was that because it came from a peaceful place when I heard myself questioning that, saying it's
Yeah.
not right. It was peaceful.
Now to be fair, the people who told you that, that's how they were trained. That's how I was trained.
Yeah.
Mental illness is permanent. You can't really do that much. You just make people feel a little better. There wasn't really a hope that you could actually cure mental illness or trauma or addiction. But when you understand at an insightful level, not an intellectual, but an insightful level, how the principles create your experience, it completely changes everything. It's a game changer, literally, for mental health treatment. Boy, Lord, right now with the pandemic, with social media and how we're all in our little silos, these principles they're coming at the right time because we're self-destructing at this stage in our humanity. We're going off a cliff with the climate, with political division, with world war possibility really looming again. Thought that was over, but no. So all that, if I didn't know what I know, oh my God, I couldn't sleep at night. I
Yeah.
couldn't go on. And a lot of people I talk to say, I just, boy, I wish I just can't wait to die. This world's going to hell in a handbasket. And I just think, oh God, if they just knew the principles, they would
Yeah.
realize you can be happy no matter what.
Well,
You can
and
be happy in Auschwitz. You can pretty much be happy anywhere. I'm sorry, Rachel. Go ahead.
Well, and that's what I love about the using of the word the hurricane, because in the eye of the hurricane, it's peaceful.
Mhm.
And everything can be stirring around you, and we can still walk in peace
Yes.
if we can stay in the eye.
Yes. And the eye never leaves us.
Yeah.
And if we leave it,
Yes. And then we might get whirled around
yeah,
and then we can go back to the eye.
I leave it all the time, by the
Yeah.
way. I go in and out
Yeah.
of my mental health. And even though I'm a quote unquote leader in this field, when I got COVID a month ago, man, my chemistry just went all over the map. My depression, anxiety, yeah, couldn't think, was confused, blah, blah, blah. I thought, oh my God, I'm getting senile. I was all these thoughts came in my mind and they looked real in that moment. But I can't tell you the thousands of times I've said in this year, thank God I know the principles, because then I pop out of it. But I'm still human, so I still will have those thoughts come through my mind. So I don't, that's why you don't want to think that this is a cure-all, that you'll never have a negative thought again. No, it's like your immune system in your body. Right now, we both have cancer in our body. We both have all kinds of diseases in our body. But because our immune system is strong, it outweighs those effects. So a psychological immune system is equally, if not more important, because when you're psychologically resilient, it has a real positive effect on your body. You heal very quickly when you're in a good state of mind.
Oh,
If
I
you're
know
in a
that.
good
I know the
state,
fact of that one.
me too. Yeah, one of the stories I tell in my book, I had chronic Lyme disease 3 times, and that'll test you to the limit.
So, because that's such a powerful story, do you mind ending with that?
Sure,
Okay.
I think I can just
Yeah.
tell. So many years back, I got bit by a tick that was carrying what's called the Lyme parasite, named after a town in Massachusetts. But I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know what happened. I just knew all of a sudden I didn't have as much energy. I was really tired all the time, and which was not like me. I'm a very energetic person. And so I went to the doctor, and he said, I should probably test you for Lyme. And sure enough, I had Lyme disease. So he put me on doxycycline and all the medications and caught it early, so I got over it. But then a year or so later, I'm into gardening and I'm into being in nature in the woods. So I got bit again, and that time I got really, really, really sick. Every bone in my body ached. It felt like my bones and joints were on fire. I was trying to write a book on burnout. I couldn't write anything, and I was at my cabin and I was just desperate. I was just crying by myself in the cabin in so much pain, and I just kind of was in that moment of desperation. I just kind of cried out, and I got this realization reminding me of the principles again, and then it was that just you're creating this panic. I could see I was panicking with my thoughts, and it calmed me down to a great degree. But so I went to doctors who specialized in Lyme, and I changed my diet, and I did all the things that you can do with Lyme. And I, you know, just studied lots of self-help things, but I still wasn't well. And so my wife is into kung fu, martial art, and she has a grandmaster in Malaysia. So she was going to go study with him, and she said there's going to be a course on healing there as well. You should come along. So I went with her, and one day she was in her kung fu class, and she said, "Why don't you join us for lunch?" Andrew, who was this healer, who kung or qigong healer from Switzerland, was going to be with the group, and she said, "See if you can get a session with him to help you." And so they were going to lunch. I caught up with them in the middle of Chinatown in Penang, Malaysia. It's all noisy and everything. And I grabbed Andrew and I said, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" He says, "Yeah, sure." I said, "I wonder if I could just get a session with you. I got Lyme disease and I need to talk to you about it." He says, "Well, let's just do it right now." And I said, "Here, walking in the streets of Chinatown?" He says, "Yeah, why not?" I said, "Oh, okay." So he says, "So what's the problem?" He said, I told him that I gotten Lyme disease this last summer. And and he says, "Stop right there. Don't ever say you have Lyme disease again. You are not your disease." And I said, "Oh, well, I got Lyme, was diagnosed with it. I can't deny." He says, "Every time you say that, every cell in your body through the quantum field, everything you know and you've learned about Lyme runs through the channels of your cells and it keeps the Lyme symptoms going. It's suppressing your immune system." I said, "Oh, I know that. I've written several books about that." He says, "No, you don't." I said, "Well, how can you say that?" I was kind of offended. I'm a best-selling author, blah, blah. And he says, "I can see it in your face. You don't believe me." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "I can see it in your face. You don't believe me." So he keeps talking about the quantum field and we carry on through the noisy traffic. And at one point, after he had said many things to me, at some point I had an insight and I didn't say anything. And he turns to me and he says, "Now you believe me." I said, "Well, how do you know that?" And he says, "I can see it in your face." I had a shift, an insight. And I said, "Well, great. Can we set up a time?" He says, "Why? We just had it." "You're done. You're good. Forget it." No, it can't be that easy. So I went back to my room and I slept and just I was all shook up with this, really stirred me up. And I slept really deep that night. And when I woke up the next morning, my head had totally cleared. I felt all this energy. And I went down to the pool and I swam and I swam and I couldn't, I felt like I could swim forever. I went to the weight room. I doubled my weights from the day before with ease. I could press the bar. And that was it. It never came back. It's over.
And I have tears in my eyes because I love this story so much because you can transfer that to anything, any kind of diagnosis a person gives, a mental health those mental health diagnoses we're talking about. It's the
Mhm.
same thing. It's if we align with any of this stuff of being overweight, of being this, of being that, of being anything, yeah,
Yeah, and
it hit me so hard.
it's not a technique.
No,
It's a realization of how it works. It's that simple. I know it's not easy for our intellect to grasp that, but you have to listen beyond your intellect with your heart, with your wisdom, with an open mind. And if you read this book or you learn about these principles, if you just have an open willingness and you listen deeply, you too will have insights
yeah.
and you'll have your own insight in your own unique way. There's no cookie cutter approach to this. Everyone's unique.
And after reading your book and you bringing up Sydney Banks, I had to, of course, look him up on YouTube. And one of the things he had said was listen beyond the words, listen beyond the words. And I was just like, it's so true, you know? And so thank
And
you.
what do you think he meant by that?
Is it's under them. It's it's
Yeah.
it's beyond them. It's not in the words because all our interpretations, all our thinking is in those words, like our definitions of those words. The wisdom's underneath it.
Yeah. The words are like a pointer to the wisdom.
Yeah.
And so if you get it intellectually, it's not going to help you. It'll feel good for a moment. But when you hear beyond the words, you're hearing your own insight and your own wisdom, and that's tailor-made for you and your life circumstances. And that's why it's so impactful. So that was really hard for me as an intellectual person, in a doctoral program and all that. What do you listen beyond the words? What do you have if you don't have words? But there's a knowing that's beyond words. Like, how do you explain falling in love? It's beyond the words. It's a feeling. It takes over you. How do you explain forgiveness? When you really forgive someone, there's a letting go that's beyond the words of "I forgive you." You can say it a million times and not have a feeling of forgiveness. But the feeling of forgiveness is a shift, and you see things in their innocence. And then it's easy to forgive.
This has been such a remarkable episode. I am so grateful to have had this conversation with you. Thank you so much for being here. And if you are a listener, trust that if you are here, it's because you're meant to be. So thank you so much.
You're a great interviewer. I really enjoyed it tremendously. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you. Make sure to follow the links that accompany this episode. You will learn a lot more about today's guest and see what they have going on now. You will also get all the links to follow them on their journeys if this seed resonates with you. Come back next week for another Seed of Wisdom. If you loved what you saw or listened to, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.